So let's talk about a real puzzle from ancient law. What happens when a divine commandment, one that seems totally set in stone, is just canceled by human leaders? Today we're diving into an argument that looks at the Torah, the foundational text of Judaism, and the ancient rabbinic sages who interpreted it. And it's a story that really challenges the whole idea of how religious law works. Okay, let's just get right to the heart of it. Here's the core question. Can human authorities, no matter how smart or respected they are, just decide to cancel a direct commandment from the Torah? I mean, it's a massive question, right? And to really get our heads around the argument, we have to look at one very specific and pretty strange biblical ritual. So the case study at the heart of all this is a ritual known as the Sota. This thing is straight out of the Book of Numbers, and it was designed to deal with a really tough and socially explosive situation: a husband suspecting his wife of adultery. Now, you really got to focus on that phrase, divine mechanism. According to the Torah, this wasn't just some symbolic gesture or a psychological trick. No, this was seen as a direct pipeline to a heavenly verdict, a kind of supernatural lie detector test to get to the truth when there were no witnesses. So how did it supposedly work? Well, it was a very clear step-by-step process. A husband brings his wife, who he suspects, to the priest. The priest then mixes up this special drink called the bitter waters. The woman drinks it, and then it's judgment time. If she's guilty, the Torah describes a horrific divine punishment. But if she's innocent, not only is she totally cleared, she's actually blessed by God. You get one of two very clear, miraculous outcomes. Okay, so you have this divine ritual, right? Straight from the Torah. Well, this is where the story gets really weird. This practice was stopped. I mean, actively canceled. And the reason they gave for doing it is, as our source argues, just baffling. And that's the big mystery we're digging into. Why on earth would you cancel a divine tool that's designed to find the truth and deliver justice? You'd think that if the problem it addresses gets worse, you'd need it more than ever, right? And this is the official reason the rabbinic sages gave. They said quite plainly that the ritual was stopped because adultery just became too common. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. The problem got worse, so they got rid of the tool designed to fix it. And right there, that's where the author of our source material basically says, hold on a second. This makes absolutely no sense. They argue this logic isn't just a little weird, it's completely upside down. Just look at it side by side. The situation is that the very sin this test was for is now happening all over the place. And the decision? To get rid of the test. It's like saying, wow, this fire is really spreading. Quick, hide the fire extinguisher. It just doesn't compute. The author really drives this home with some powerful questions. I mean, think about it in our own terms. If murders started to rise, would we get rid of the laws against murder? If suddenly everyone was stealing, would we just scrap all the penalties for theft? Of course not. That's absurd. So, for the author, the main takeaway is this. The Torah's laws are meant to be weapons to fight social problems, not tools you put back in the box the moment the fight gets tough. From this perspective, the sage's decision looks less like a wise ruling and more like a complete surrender. And all of this leads to the author's really explosive central claim. This isn't just about one weird ritual anymore. This is about asking, were the sages just interpreting the Torah, or were they actually changing it? And here is the author's thesis, laid out plain and simple. They're not saying it was a subtle reinterpretation. No. They're saying the sages performed surgery. They took a living, breathing commandment right out of the text and turned it into a historical artifact. Just dead letters in a book? And the author makes another great point, right? Think about it. If this whole ritual was supposed to have an expiration date, like if it was only for times when society was good, why wouldn't the Torah just say so? God could have easily added a line like, by the way, only do this if adultery is rare. But there's nothing like that in the text. So the author's final verdict on the Sota case is pretty blunt. This wasn't a faithful reading of God's law. It was a human decision, a pragmatic choice to handle a social crisis that leaders felt was getting out of hand, basically putting human convenience above a divine command. But here's the thing. According to the author, this wasn't some isolated incident. They argue that if you look closer, you start to see a much bigger and more concerning pattern of behavior. To prove this, the author points to other big examples. Take an eye for an eye. The Torah sounds pretty literal, right? A physical punishment. But the sages said, nope, that means you just pay money.
Or how about the rule, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk? The Torah repeats that specific phrase 3 times, but the sages expanded it into a total ban on mixing any meat with any dairy ever. The author says these, plus completely canceling the Sota, show a consistent pattern of changing the law, not just explaining it.
So what's the connection here? According to the author, it's the same playbook every time. You take the simple, plain meaning of the text, you kind of take it apart, and then you replace it with something completely new, something human-made.
Okay, so why should we care about some ancient legal debate? Well, the author argues it's because this sets a precedent, and a really dangerous one at that.
And this is the author's big warning for us today. The moment you accept the logic that a divine commandment can be canceled just because society changes or it gets too hard to follow, well, you've just opened Pandora's box. What's to stop any commandment from being tossed aside when it becomes inconvenient or unpopular?
And this leads to the author's final powerful accusation. They say, look, at this point, you're not interpreting anymore. You've crossed a line. You're taking something that's supposed to be divine and turning it into, and I'm quoting here, a plaything in the hands of human beings.
And that's where this explainer leaves us, with this huge, unresolved question that the author puts on the table. In any system of law, but especially a religious one, where is that line? When does helpful interpretation become a fundamental, unauthorized change? It's a question that really gets to the very heart of what faith, law, and tradition are all about.